Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. It was another Sunday dinner at my parents' house. One of those gatherings where you could almost predict what would happen. The table was set with too much food, the kind of spread that was meant to make you feel guilty if you didn't overeat. My mom and dad, my two brothers, and a few extended family members. Everyone was there. The familiar hum of conversation filled the room, the clinking of forks and knives, the occasional burst of laughter. I was halfway through a piece of roasted chicken when Jeff, my cousin, leaned over the table with his usual smug grin. "So, Rachel, you still doing that freelancing thing?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I could feel the weight of the question, the thinly veiled mockery in his tone, same as every year. Jeff had a job in finance, a steady climb up the corporate ladder, and for some reason, he always seemed to think that was the only real way to make a living. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I've been running a successful digital marketing business for the last several years." I didn't want to get into the details, didn't want to explain that I'd been making more money than some of the full-time employees at his office. He chuckled, clearly unconvinced. "That's cute, but you don't get benefits or a retirement plan or anything, right?" I tried not to roll my eyes. "I'm doing fine." The rest of the family chimed in with their usual disinterest. My mom, of course, couldn't let it go. "You should really think about settling down, Rachel," she said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Maybe get a real job with some stability. Like Jeff, he's got it made." I felt the frustration start to build, that familiar heat rising in my chest. But I just focused on my food, pushing the mashed potatoes around my plate. Everyone else was engaged in some side conversation, and I was grateful for the distraction. Mark, my younger brother, was the only one who ever bothered to defend me, but even he stayed quiet tonight, as if he knew it wouldn't make a difference. So I sat there, chewing my food slowly, letting the noise around me drown out. I didn't need to engage in their judgments anymore. They were never going to get it. I had learned to let it go, but it still stung. The next morning, my phone rang just after I sat down at my desk, a hot cup of coffee in hand. I'd barely taken a sip when I saw the number. It was a potential client, someone who had reached out about a marketing campaign. I answered, trying not to sound too eager, but I knew I needed this. "Hi, Rachel." The voice on the other end was upbeat, maybe too much so for that hour. "Yeah, this is Rachel. How's it going?" "Great, I'm Tom. I own a few gyms around the area, and I've been looking to take our online presence up a notch. I heard you were the person to talk to about that." I tried not to smile. "I specialize in digital marketing for businesses just like yours. I'd love to help you out." We went over the basics, the kind of work I do, the services I offer. The call ended on a high note with Tom saying he was interested in moving forward and setting up a meeting. It felt good. Too good, honestly. I hadn't landed a new client in a while, and I was hungry for something to prove my worth. A few hours later, I got an email from Tom confirming the meeting. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop. I felt optimistic, which I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. When I walked into the coffee shop, the faint scent of roasted beans and sugar hit me. Tom was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking like he'd been waiting for a while. He stood up as I approached, shaking my hand. "Good to meet you, Rachel," he said, his grip firm, too firm for a business handshake. "Good to meet you, too." I slid into the chair opposite him, my heart still beating a little faster than usual. He got right into it, explaining his gym chain's social media presence, or lack of it, and how he wanted my help. I listened, nodding along, already running through potential strategies in my head. "So, here's the thing," Tom said, leaning forward. "I like what I've seen of your work, but the budget's tight. We're a small business, so I can't afford the rates you usually charge. What can you do for it?" He named a number that was way lower than what I typically worked with. My stomach twisted. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to negotiate my fees, but something about the way he said it, so matter-of-factly, rubbed me the wrong way. "I'm sure we could come to some kind of arrangement," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I didn't want to come off as desperate, but I also didn't want to lose the client before the meeting even got started. We went back and forth, with Tom offering me less and me trying to explain why my services cost what they did. That's when he dropped the line that made my stomach drop. "I think you'd be better off sticking to what you're good at. Social media for small businesses. You know, what you've been doing for years. Like your cousin Jeff. He's really killing it in the corporate world. I'm sure you could learn a thing or two from him." My brain froze. Jeff. Of course. This guy knew my family, and there it was again. The comparison. The reminder of how my freelance career was never enough in their eyes. I had worked for years to prove I could do this, and now it was spilling into my professional life too. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup, and I felt a sharp edge of frustration cut through the calm I had worked so hard to maintain. I forced myself to speak. I'm actually really proud of the work I've done. It's been successful, and it's what I love. I don't need to compare it to anyone else's career, especially not Jeff's. Tom raised an eyebrow but didn't seem fazed. Sure, I get that. But, we're talking about real corporate marketing here, like Jeff does. The words hit harder than I expected. It was like a door slamming in my face. The whole situation, Tom, his discount offer, the way he casually dismissed what I'd built, felt like a slap. I was so tired of feeling like I had to defend my business to people who didn't understand it. I'm going to have to pass on this, I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. I'm not willing to lower my rates for something that doesn't value my work properly. Thanks for your time, though. Tom blinked, caught off guard, but nodded. Okay, no hard feelings. I stood up, not giving him a chance to say more. My heart was still pounding, but I felt a small rush of relief as I walked out of that coffee shop. I didn't have to take that offer. I didn't have to justify what I did to anyone anymore. As I stepped outside, I looked up at the clear blue sky, the cold air biting at my cheeks. Something shifted in me then. I wasn't going to let Jeff's shadow or anyone else's opinions control how I saw my work. I had to stop undervaluing myself. I had to stop pretending like my career didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else's. And damn it, I wasn't going to let anyone treat me like I wasn't enough. By the time I got home, I had managed to push the weird coffee shop meeting with Tom to the back of my mind, but then I saw the email. The subject line caught my eye. New office space opportunity. I clicked it open, already feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. The message was from Lucas, a property manager I'd been in touch with for a while about possibly expanding my business into an office space. We'd exchanged a few emails over the last couple of months, but I hadn't expected anything serious to come from it. Hi, Rachel, it started. I hope this finds you well. We have a multi-unit office building opening up next month, and I think it could be a perfect fit for your growing business. There's space available that could house your team and offer room to expand as needed. If you're interested, I'd love to schedule a meeting to go over the details. I reread the email twice, a real office space. It felt like a step up, like something that could validate everything I'd built. But then, that familiar knot in my stomach twisted. The idea of putting down money for a space like that, the commitment, the potential failure, I couldn't help but feel a little afraid. I stood there for a moment, staring at the email, weighing my options. And then I thought about my family, about how they'd looked at me when I quit my 9-to-5 to pursue freelance marketing, how they still called it a side gig whenever they spoke about it, how my mom always told me to get a real job with a real paycheck. I'd learned to ignore their judgment, but the doubts lingered. Could I handle a space like that? Would my business even survive in the long run? I wasn't sure I could shake that feeling, but I knew I couldn't let it stop me. I picked up the phone and called Mark, my younger brother. He was the only one who ever really got it. He didn't ask a bunch of questions about why I didn't just settle down and get a corporate job. He'd been my biggest supporter from the start. Hey, Mark, I said when he picked up. Hey, what's up? His voice was casual, but I could hear the rustling of papers in the background, probably working on some project for school. I just got an email about this office space. I'm thinking about doing it, but I'm not sure. It feels like a huge step. Wait, seriously, an office, like an actual office. That sounds awesome. I know, right? I said, feeling a small spark of excitement. But I don't know. What if it's too much too soon? What if I can't make it work? Mark was quiet for a second. I could hear him thinking, weighing it out. You've been doing this for years now, Rachel. You've been successful on your own. This office is just a bigger step. It doesn't change what you've already built. I let out a long breath, nodding to myself even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I guess you're right. I've been doing fine without their approval. I just don't want to mess it up. You won't, Mark said, the conviction in his voice making me feel a little better. Just go for it. You've always figured it out before. What's the worst that could happen? I guess. Thanks, Mark. No problem. Let me know what you decide. After hanging up, I felt a little lighter. Mark was right. I had taken risks before, and they had paid off. Maybe this was just another one of those moments where I needed to take the plunge, trust myself, and figure it out along the way. A few hours later, I met Lucas at the building. The space was exactly what I needed: clean, open, with plenty of room to grow. We went through the details of the partnership, how I could rent the space on a flexible lease with an option to take on more units as my business expanded. It sounded perfect. But as Lucas led me through the building, I started to feel a little uneasy. "So, I don't know if you're aware," Lucas said, "but this office space was previously leased by a tenant who recently moved out. His business didn't need the space anymore, so it's available for you to take over." I nodded, not thinking much of it until Lucas continued. "The guy who used to have the lease, Jeff, he's considering moving his operation to a bigger office nearby. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a big corporate guy, pretty well known in the area." My stomach dropped, like someone had shoved a brick into my gut. "Jeff," I froze for a second. "Wait, you're talking about my cousin Jeff?" Lucas smiled like he hadn't noticed the change in my expression. "Yeah, that's the one. He's been here for a while. You probably know him. Anyway, he's looking at something bigger, so this space is open now." I nodded, my mind racing. There it was again, the shadow of Jeff hovering over everything I did. Even in my business dealings, it felt like his success, his corporate success, was the standard, the thing I'd been trying to escape. And now, here it was again, creeping into my new venture. "I can assure you," Lucas added quickly, sensing my hesitation, "this is a completely separate matter. Jeff's business is different from yours. He's moving on because he needs more space, not because of anything to do with you." I nodded again, but I didn't feel reassured. It wasn't just about the space. It was about my family's judgments, their opinions. It felt like they were always watching, always waiting for me to fail. As Lucas went over more details, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something bigger than just a business decision. It wasn't just the space. It was the constant pressure to prove myself, not just to my clients, but to my family, especially Jeff. I wanted to make the decision based on what was best for me, not what he might think or how it might reflect on my career. But somehow, I knew this wasn't going to be as simple as signing a lease. I could feel the weight of my family's disapproval already pressing in, even though they weren't physically there. The next Sunday, I knew exactly what to expect at the family dinner, the usual spread. Too much food, too many voices, too much noise. But this time, there was a new layer to it, something hovering under the surface, something that made the air feel heavier than usual. Jeff wasn't his usual self. He seemed quieter, almost distant. I caught him glancing at me a few times across the table, but he avoided eye contact, turning his gaze quickly back to his plate. His comments were short, clipped, like he couldn't be bothered to engage. I figured he was just in a mood, maybe stressed about work or whatever was going on in his corporate world. But as the night wore on, I could feel it building, a tension that wasn't just from the usual small talk and uncomfortable silences. Finally, he broke the silence. "So, Rachel," he started, his voice a little too casual, "I hear you're making some big moves with that office space. Are you sure that's a good idea?" I looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time all night. I could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down, like he was already telling me I was making a mistake before I even had a chance to explain. I stayed calm. "It's a good opportunity, Jeff. It's a smart investment." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "Right, smart. But you do realize that it's risky, right? You're just one person. You're going to jeopardize your financial stability for a building." He shook his head like he couldn't even believe I was considering it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. "I've been doing fine on my own, Jeff. I think I can handle it." But that didn't seem to satisfy him. He pressed on, his voice getting more pointed. "It's not like working for yourself is the same as working in the real world. There's a reason corporate careers are stable, Rachel. You can't just keep jumping from one thing to the next, hoping it'll work out." I felt that familiar rush of frustration building in my chest. I knew where this was going. He was going to keep comparing my business to his cushy finance job, the one that came with a steady paycheck, benefits, and all the things he thought really mattered. But I didn't have the energy to argue with him. Not tonight. Before I could respond, Dad chimed in from the other end of the table, his voice carrying the weight of years of concern. "I agree with Jeff," he said. "Maybe it's time you considered working in an office with a real corporate structure. You know, something with some long-term security. You've been on your own for a while, Rachel, but it might be time to think about a steady paycheck." My stomach tightened. I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd say something in my defense, but he was sitting there, looking like he wasn't sure if he wanted to get involved. Mom, of course, had to add her 2 cents. And what about the properties? How are you going to manage multiple units and still run your one-woman show? You're doing a lot on your own. It's a lot of stress, honey. My hands clenched around my fork. I was trying so hard not to snap. I wanted to say so many things. Things about how I had built something on my own, how I didn't need anyone's approval, how I was successful without a corporate structure holding me up. But the words got stuck in my throat. Finally, the frustration boiled over. You know what? I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I've been successful without any of your approval, without a real job, without a corporate paycheck. I'm doing just fine. There was a long pause. The room went still, and I could feel all their eyes on me. But instead of feeling better, I felt small, like I had just proven every single thing they had been saying for years. Like my words didn't matter, like they were all just waiting for me to fail. Mark finally spoke up, trying to defend me, but his voice came out hesitant. Look, I don't know what's so bad about Rachel trying to make things bigger. She's been killing it on her own. She doesn't need a corporate job to succeed. But even Mark's voice didn't break through the tension that had thickened in the air. Jeff's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time all night, I saw him soften, just for a second. But it didn't last. He shook his head and muttered something about not taking unnecessary risks and knowing what was best. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The weight of it, the weight of their judgment, was suffocating. I couldn't sit there any longer. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this, I said, my voice tight. You're all just waiting for me to fail. But you know what? I'm not failing, and I don't need your approval to succeed. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked away from the table, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even look back as I went to grab my coat. Mark followed me, his footsteps quick behind me. Hey, you okay? He asked, his voice gentle, like he was trying to make sure I wasn't falling apart. I took a breath, shaking my head. No, but I will be. I walked out of the house, the cool night air biting at my skin. I didn't know what my family expected from me anymore, but I wasn't going to let their doubts stop me. I wasn't going to let Jeff's judgment or anyone else's hold me back. The office was mine to take, and I wasn't about to let anyone talk me out of it. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, half expecting another potential client. Hi, Rachel. Lucas's voice crackled through the receiver. We need to talk about the office space. There's a bit of an issue. My stomach dropped. What's going on? There's a leaseholder in one of the units, he started, sounding a little uncomfortable. His name's Jeff, and the lease terms are, well, they're outdated. It's a long-term deal, way below market value, and the current ownership wants to renegotiate. They're trying to make things fair, but Jeff's not exactly cooperating. I froze. Jeff. The name hit me like a slap in the face, and I was already bracing myself for the fallout. So, what does that mean for me? Well, Lucas hesitated. If you move forward with this, it could be tricky. The ownership's asking for a fair market rate, but Jeff's refusing to pay it. He's been difficult to deal with, and now he's claiming that the new owners are just a bunch of corporate sharks trying to screw him over. I clenched my jaw, trying to ignore the sting of hearing Jeff's name again, this time in a completely different context. Of course it was him. Of course his lease was the sticking point. And you're saying I need to get involved in this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, not necessarily, Lucas said carefully, but I'm just putting this out there because Jeff's a family connection. He's been known to leverage those relationships when it suits him. My mind raced, the words landing like stones. Leverage those relationships. That was exactly what I'd been afraid of. I'd felt the pressure of Jeff's shadow hanging over everything I did, but now it seemed like he was pulling my family into it too. Are you suggesting I do something about it? I asked, a little more sharply than I meant to. I'm just saying, it might be easier if you personally handle this. If Jeff knows you're involved, it could shift the dynamic. Maybe it'll smooth things over. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around my phone. The idea of going head-to-head with Jeff again didn't exactly excite me, but I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let him use his corporate career and our family ties as leverage to get special treatment. Not this time. I'll handle it, I said, my voice firm. I don't mind dealing with it directly. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Lucas responded. All right, just be careful, okay? Jeff's not an easy guy to reason with. I ended the call and set my phone down, the weight of what was coming settling heavy on my shoulders. I couldn't let this bleed into my professional life. Couldn't let him undermine my business just because of his status or because of what the family might think. I didn't want to go into full battle mode, but I knew I couldn't let him walk all over me anymore. I took a deep breath, staring out the window at the gray morning. It wasn't just about the office anymore. It was about standing up for my business and for everything I'd built without anyone else's permission. I was going to deal with Jeff head on, even if it meant facing him at his most difficult. He might think he could use family to get what he wanted, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. This time, I was going to fight back. I scheduled the meeting with Jeff for the next afternoon. My hands were clammy as I typed out the message, but I didn't hesitate. This was happening. I wasn't going to hide behind emails or phone calls anymore. When I walked into the office building, the familiar scent of coffee and paper hit me, just like I remembered it from the few times I had visited with Lucas. But today it felt different, heavier, like I was walking into a battlefield rather than an office. I could already feel my pulse quicken. I made my way up to the floor where Jeff's office was. His door was wide open, the sound of him on a call drifting out as I approached. He didn't even notice me standing there until I cleared my throat. He looked up, caught off guard, and then quickly hung up the phone. A slight tension flashed across his face, but he didn't say anything at first. "Rachel," he greeted me, his voice stiff. "What's this about?" I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about the lease." Jeff's expression tightened, but he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Take a seat. What's the problem now?" I took a deep breath before sitting down, trying to control the knot that had formed in my stomach. "It's not a problem, Jeff. It's just that the new owners are making the building fairer for all tenants by adjusting the leases to market rates. You've got a deal that's way below market value, and they need to bring it in line with everyone else." Jeff's eyes narrowed, and he folded his arms over his chest, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, so now you're the one pushing this. The new owners are probably telling you what to do, huh? You're just trying to get ahead in your own business by using family connections, right?" I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't flinch. "This isn't about me trying to make money or using anyone's connections, Jeff. It's about fairness. You've been paying way less than everyone else, and the owners have every right to make sure the terms are adjusted." "Fairness?" He scoffed. "This is just another excuse to jack up the rent and push people out. You've got no idea what it's like to run a real business, Rachel. You think this is some sort of easy move to make more money?" I felt a wave of heat in my chest. "I'm not here to make a personal attack, Jeff. I'm not doing this because I want to see you fail. I'm doing this because the building needs to be managed properly and the lease you've got is outdated. They want to fix it, that's all." Jeff shook his head, muttering under his breath. "You've been so eager to make money off everything lately. I mean, look at you, always hustling, always chasing the next thing. You think because you've got some small business, you're on the same level as people like me. I'm actually making real progress, not just running a social media account for small businesses." I felt my fist clench, but I stayed calm. I wasn't about to let him keep belittling me. "What's it to you, Jeff? Why do you care so much what I'm doing with my career? You don't get to tell me how to run my business just because it's different from yours. You can't keep mocking me for it and treating me like I'm not serious. You don't know what I've worked for." His gaze hardened, and for a second, I thought I saw something like doubt flash across his face, but he quickly masked it. He leaned forward. "I'm not the one who needs to prove anything here, Rachel. You're the one trying to make this whole thing bigger than it is. You're going to learn soon enough that these kinds of risks, they just don't pay off." The words stung, but I wasn't about to let him win this. "I've already proven everything I need to prove. I'm not asking for anyone's approval. I've been successful without your support. This decision isn't personal, Jeff, but I need you to understand that I'm not backing down on this." He stared at me for a moment, silence hanging thick between us. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples like I was giving him a headache. "You don't get it, do you? You're too eager to make it big. This is about your ego, not business." My jaw clenched. I was done being the target of his judgments. "You have two choices, Jeff," I said, leaning forward, my voice steady but firm. "You can accept the new market rate lease, or you can vacate the space. But I'm not going to let you drag this out just because you're trying to avoid paying your fair share." His face faltered. The arrogance, the smug superiority that usually clung to him like a second skin, slipped for just a moment. There was something in his eyes that made me pause, a flicker of uncertainty, like maybe he wasn't as sure about everything as he wanted to be. He sat back, exhaling heavily. Fine, he muttered, pushing a pen across the desk. I'll sign, but don't expect me to like it. I reached across and picked up the pen, my hand steady despite the adrenaline running through me. I placed it on the contract and pushed it toward him. Good decision, I said quietly. He signed with a grimace, and I stood up, collecting my things. The room felt colder somehow, like the shift in our relationship had created a rift that wasn't going to be easy to repair. I walked to the door, but before I left, I turned back to look at him one last time. This isn't personal, Jeff, I said, but I'm done letting you use me to get what you want. He didn't respond, and I didn't wait for him to. I closed the door behind me and walked out into the hallway, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't just about the lease, it was about standing up for myself, for my business. I wasn't going to let Jeff or anyone walk all over me anymore. As I walked down the stairs, I felt a sense of finality, like a door had slammed shut, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was walking forward. The walk back to my car felt like I was moving through molasses. My legs were tired, my shoulders heavy with the weight of what I had just done. I kept replaying the conversation with Jeff in my head, the way he had tried to push me into a corner, the way I'd held my ground. I had stood up to him, finally, but at what cost? I reached my car and leaned against the hood for a moment, staring out at the parking lot. It was late afternoon, the sun sinking low in the sky, the air crisp against my skin. It was hard to shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in my relationship with Jeff, but in me. For the first time in a long time, I felt strong. But that strength came with a price. Every decision I'd made, every choice to keep pushing forward on my own, had been met with disapproval. And it had hurt. A lot. I slid into the driver's seat, pulling the door closed behind me, the familiar scent of leather and coffee surrounding me. I cranked the engine and let it idle for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The weight in my chest hadn't fully lifted. I was proud of myself, yes, but I also felt exhausted. I couldn't ignore the fact that this whole ordeal had dredged up years of judgment, years of feeling like I wasn't enough. There were so many times my parents had tried to fix me, to convince me that I wasn't doing things the right way. Get a real job, Rachel, my mom had said more times than I could count. You need to work for a corporation like Jeff. It's secure. It's stable. I used to listen, used to wonder if they were right. After all, Jeff was a financial success. He had the fancy office, the shiny suit, the status, everything my parents thought was worth aspiring to. But every time I tried to fit myself into that mold, I felt like I was suffocating. Like something inside me would break if I tried to live the life they envisioned for me. It hadn't been easy, building my business from the ground up. It hadn't been glamorous or straightforward. I'd faced rejection, failure, and 1,000 moments of self-doubt. But what I'd built? It was mine. My own sweat, my own late nights, my own decisions. It wasn't just about proving Jeff or anyone else wrong. It had never been about them. It was about proving something to myself. I thought about the last few years, about how I'd ignored the whispers, the doubts, the pressure to conform. I hadn't listened to the people who told me my business wasn't real. I hadn't let their judgment define me, even when it would have been easier to just give in. And now, standing up to Jeff, forcing him to sign those papers, it was like I had finally crossed some invisible line. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't afraid of anyone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking my thoughts. I pulled it out, expecting some work email, but it was a text from Mark. Congrats on finally standing up to Jeff. You did it. Proud of you, sis. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. And for the first time today, I felt something like relief. Mark had always been on my side, even when the rest of the family wasn't. He was the only one who truly understood the journey I was on. I typed back quickly. Thanks, Mark. Couldn't have done it without you. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. The text was small, just a few lines of support, but it felt like a weight lifting from my chest. He believed in me. He always had. That was enough. But as I sat in the car, I knew there was still so much more ahead. This wasn't the end. My family's judgment wasn't going to magically disappear just because I had made one bold move. There was still the weight of their expectations to carry. Still that feeling of being looked at like I wasn't quite doing it right, like I wasn't enough. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I had learned how to silence their doubts before, and I was going to keep doing it. I wasn't in this for their approval, I was in it for me. I started the car, the engine humming to life. I had more work to do, more decisions to make, more risks to take. But for the first time, I felt like I could handle it. I was finally starting to see the real value of what I had built, what I had become, and that felt damn good. I put the car in gear and drove off. The sun dipping below the horizon, the road ahead stretching wide and open in front of me. I had been bracing for the usual tension when I walked into my parents' house for Christmas dinner. Every year it was the same. Awkward conversations, side-eye glances, the heavy unspoken judgment of my career choice. But this year felt different, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The smell of turkey and mashed potatoes filled the house, the soft clink of silverware on plates mixing with the low hum of holiday music playing in the background. The familiar faces of my family were gathered around the table: Mom and Dad, my younger brother Mark, and Jeff, of course, along with a few extended family members. The laughter from the others was louder than usual, almost like they were trying to drown out the uncomfortable silence that always hovered between me and Jeff. I sat down, and right away, I noticed Jeff seemed different. He wasn't cracking jokes like he usually did, or dominating the conversation with stories about his latest business trip. He was quieter than usual, picking at his food and avoiding eye contact. Mom, on the other hand, seemed to be in a good mood. She smiled at me, her eyes a little softer than I remembered. "Rachel, I've been meaning to ask," she said, leaning forward. "How's your business going? You've been doing so well, haven't you?" I blinked, caught off guard by her tone. There was no trace of doubt in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "It's going great," I said, the words feeling good as I spoke them. "I've taken on a few new clients, and things are growing. I'm excited about what's next." Dad, sitting next to her, nodded. "We're proud of you, Rachel," he said, and for the first time in a long while, his voice didn't carry that hint of skepticism. "You've really proven yourself. You're doing something a lot of people wouldn't have the guts to do." My heart gave a little jump at his words, but at the same time, I felt a familiar discomfort crawl up my spine. I'd spent so many years fighting to prove myself to them, but this sudden shift in how they saw me, it was unsettling. They still didn't get it, didn't fully understand the choices I had made, but in this moment, their validation was something I hadn't expected. It wasn't the full approval I'd hoped for, but it was something. Mark, ever the supportive brother, grinned at me from across the table. "So, any big moves in the works?" he asked. "I heard you were talking about expanding into that office space. How's that going?" I smiled back at him, grateful for his consistent support. "Yeah, I'm actually moving forward with it," I said, excitement bubbling up as I talked about the future. "It's a big step, but I think it'll be good for the business." Jeff shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I could feel his eyes on me. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been working on restructuring my business too," he said, his tone tight, like he was still processing something. "It's been a lot of work, but I think it's time to expand. Maybe I'll need someone to help with marketing, make it more visible, social media, that kind of thing." I froze for a split second, trying to mask the surprise on my face. It wasn't the first time Jeff had suggested I help him with his business, but it was the first time he'd done it without the usual condescension, without making me feel like I was some small-time hustler. There was a shift in his tone, a hint of genuine interest, maybe even humility. I put my fork down, considering my response carefully. I had come a long way from the person who would have jumped at the chance to work with him, desperate for his approval. But now things felt different. I wasn't desperate anymore. "I'm happy to help, Jeff," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "But only if you're ready to treat my business with the respect it deserves. I've worked hard for what I've built, and it's not something I'm going to let anyone undermine, even if it's family." For a moment, there was silence at the table. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Jeff's reaction. He stared at me, a flicker of something, regret maybe, passing across his face. He didn't say anything at first, but after a long pause, he nodded, his expression softening. "You're right," he said quietly. I've been an ass about all of this. I didn't get it, but I do now. Thanks." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. For the first time, Jeff seemed to see me as more than just the younger cousin who had chosen the wrong path. Maybe he finally understood what I'd been building all these years. I didn't know if that meant everything would magically change between us. Family dynamics didn't shift overnight, but it felt like a small step forward. The conversation shifted back to lighter topics, and I noticed that the rest of the family seemed more at ease. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Later, as the night wound down and the last of the dishes were being cleared away, I sat back in my chair, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The validation from my parents, Mark's unwavering support, and even Jeff's grudging acknowledgement. It wasn't everything I had ever wanted, but it was enough for now. I still had a long road ahead when it came to navigating my family's expectations. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to them anymore. I knew who I was, and that finally was enough. As I stood to leave, I caught Jeff's eye. He nodded to me, and this time it wasn't loaded with judgment. It was just acknowledgement. And I walked out of my parents' house that night feeling lighter than I had in years. A few months passed since Christmas, and things had been steadily moving forward. My business had grown in ways I hadn't fully expected. I'd landed a large contract with a major client, one that officially marked the next step in my career. As I pulled into the parking lot of my new office space, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment wash over me, but there was no overwhelming urge to tell anyone about it, to seek their approval. It wasn't that I didn't want to share my success with the people who mattered, I just didn't need their validation anymore. The new office was everything I'd hoped for, spacious, modern, with big windows that let in natural light. I'd worked hard to get here, and it felt like the culmination of everything I'd fought for. The hours of late-night work, the constant hustle, the rejection, everything had led to this. I locked the car and stepped out, the cool breeze brushing against my face. I took a deep breath, soaking in the moment. This was mine. The feeling wasn't as euphoric as I'd expected, but there was something peaceful about it, like I had finally reached a place where I could be proud of what I'd done, and not because anyone else was impressed, but because I knew how much I had invested in this. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back from the moment. I pulled it out to see a call from Jeff. "Hey, Jeff," I said, my voice steady, but my stomach did a quick flip. I hadn't heard from him in a while, not since that night at Christmas. "Hey, Rachel," he said, sounding a little tired. "I know it's been a minute, but I could use some advice. My business is hitting a few bumps, and I'm not sure how to push through it." I felt a small shift in the air, like this was the first time he was calling me for something other than a favor, like he actually saw my opinion as valuable. It wasn't the usual tone of superiority I had grown so used to. It was real. "Sure," I said, glancing around the office space as I leaned against the door. "What's going on?" Jeff explained his challenges, issues with a new marketing strategy, a drop in customer engagement. He was asking for guidance on how to rebrand and reach a new audience. It wasn't rocket science, but it was a different world from the financial side of things that he lived in. "I think you're on the right track," I said after listening, "but it sounds like you need a more targeted approach. You need to figure out exactly who your audience is and create content that speaks to their needs. Don't try to do too much all at once. Focus on one thing and do it well." I could tell he was taking me seriously, listening more intently than I'd ever heard him listen before. The old Jeff would have brushed me off or tried to one-up me, but this time he was quiet, processing. "Thanks," he said finally, a bit more subdued. "I appreciate it. I'll give that a shot." "No problem," I said, keeping my tone professional but not cold. "Good luck, Jeff." As I ended the call, I leaned against the door, thinking about how far I'd come from the days when I used to second-guess everything I did because of my family's opinions. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Success wasn't about having my family's approval or Jeff's acknowledgement. It was about what I had done for myself, what I had built with my own hands. I slipped my phone into my pocket and made my way back to my car, feeling a quiet strength. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I drove past my parents' house, the familiar, too comfortable place that had been full of expectations for so long. For the first time, I didn't feel the usual pull to stop, to seek out their approval or feel like I owed them some explanation of my success. I wasn't running from them anymore. I was just moving forward. I took one last glance at the house in my rearview mirror and smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Success didn't need anyone's validation but my own. And for the first time, I was at peace with that.